Hello, I'm Elijah Oaks, and I made the outro graphic for the Camarillo commercial, and I'm going to show you how I made it in After Effects. So this is what it looks like so far. So to start with, this graphic is made in two compositions. Compositions are like groups of layers that allow you to organize where all your layers are. So on our first layer, I actually have a composition inside of our composition. So let's close that first. So our first layer is comprised of this footage, which the original footage that I'm using here is actually blurred, so that part's not in After Effects. So this is our original footage that I was putting the logo on top of. So let's go to our second composition, which is where our logo actually is. So our second composition is just the logo and with the lights. So to take it one step at a time, we have our image here. This image is actually not what the original image looked like originally. So this is what the original image looked like. It actually comes with this background and it has this hashtag at the bottom. I could have cropped it out in like Photoshop or a image editing software, but I decided to just crop it out in After Effects since it would be pretty easy to do. So the first thing I did is this image has roto brush on it. So what roto brush allows you to do is it normally allows you to cut out people, but you can also cut out objects. And like in this case, I'm cutting out the logo using roto brush. So that way I can remove the black background and that hashtag that was part of the image and just be left with the logo. Okay, so let's talk about the movement. So when the Camarillo logo comes in, so this is done with 2 keyframes, and keyframes allow you to animate objects by saying this value will be here, and then at this time, a different time, this value will be here. So that's how you create motion in After Effects. And also if we play it, it's going to move pretty smoothly. And how that's done is with something called easing. So by default in After Effects, keyframes are linear, which means one position straight to the next position. But if you put easing on the last keyframe, it will smoothly go into the next position. So that's how the movement is really smooth when it comes in. Next is a detail you may have not even noticed, but the Camarillo logo is actually dark and then it brightens as it comes in. And the idea is that it looks like it's an actual object that's there, and like there's lights that are pointing at where it's going to be in the final position, but like it's not in the light as it's starting to come in, and then it goes into where some light sources are pointing at it. So how that was done was with this gray solid layer, and solids are just a single color layer that covers the whole image. And so this gray solid is cut out so it fits the shape of the logo. So as it's coming in, it fits it. So I animated it to move with the Camarillo logo. And then I'm just changing the opacity, which is how much you can see through it. So it's at 100%, and then it goes down to 0% by the time it comes all the way in. You may have noticed that even though the opacity is on 100% at this point, which means you wouldn't be able to see through it at all, it would just be gray here, you're still able to see through the layer. And that's because the color mode is set to multiply, and there's many different color modes. Modes allow you to change how a layer is visible and how it affects other layers above and below them. So multiply is multiplying the color of the gray solid with the color underneath the solid. So that's how I made it look more like a shadow, not just a gray layer with the opacity turned down, which it would look like that if I didn't change the color mode to be multiply. Okay, so the next step is these lights. So the lights are just more solids. I'm doing a trick where it looks like light, but it's actually not light, and it's just more solids. So I've brought up my timeline here so you can just see all these layers. And I have 3 solids for each of the light. And the reason I have 3 solids is because each solid is cut out to the shape of where I want the light to be. So it just has a mask on it, and it's cut out to that shape for each of these. So the reason that there's 3 layers for each light is because I'm trying to make a bloom effect where the light fades out as it comes out. So let's look at one of the masks on our red light. So this is one of the red light layers. This mask on one of our layers has mask feather on it. And what the feather allows you to do is it's like a fade between the edges of the mask. So you can have it fade into the center. And each of the layers have a different edge feather on it. So that way as it comes out, it like gradually the light slowly dissipates. So I have one that has a little bit edge feather, and then one that's more, and then there's one that's a lot more. And I did that with each of these lights. Oh yeah, and to make the color of the solids, I color picked with the color pick tool when I was making the solids the color, so that way it was exactly the same color. Okay, hopping back to our first layer, let's turn on our composition for the logo. But our logo looks a little separated from the rest of the scene now. So if I turn these other layers on, it's going to suddenly look like it's really there. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a shadow on top of the footage under the logo to make it look like the logo is like an object that's floating in front of the footage. So I turn those layers off. So how I did that is we have our composition on top, and then on the very bottom we have our background footage that the logo is on top of. And so then I have this blue solid here, so I turn that on. That's where our shadow is. I'm actually going to turn off the logo too. So that's our shadow layer. And I keyframed that to move with the Camarillo logo on this layer. And it doesn't actually move like directly behind it. I actually have it so that it actually starts bigger and then it gets smaller as it gets closer, because that's how shadows work. And then it lines up once it's all the way there. So it like starts up really high and then it comes down, and then that also has easing on the keyframes. But now the shadow looks like just a blue solid, like it doesn't really look like a shadow. So how I did that is I have another copy of the background footage on top of the blue mask, and its color mode is set to color. So I turned that on. Suddenly it now looks like a realistic shadow. So the color mode takes the color of the footage in this case, and it's applying that color to the layers underneath it. So that way the blue solid that I'm using to be the shadow turns into the shadow color would be if that area was just darker, which makes it look like a real shadow. And the shadow also is done by just using a mask on the solid, and it has a little bit of an edge feather, that way the shadow looks soft. So that's all the layers of the outro graphic. A tip I have for making graphics is to add shadows like behind the graphics, and think about lighting if the graphics were like elements in a 3D scene. And it's important to do that because it makes your scene look a lot more visually interesting and a lot less flat. Another thing is you can use masks to do a lot of different things. So I use masks to make shadows, I use masks to make lights, I've used masks to make shapes and objects. Like, you don't even have to go and make an image in an image program. You can literally just make a solid and then cut out the solid with a mask and just make it into any shape you want, and then like put more masks on top of it and cut those out, and then you can like make your own graphics in After Effects without even needing to go to another program to like draw something.